Welcome to Contemplify, where we seek to kindle the examined life for contemplatives in the world. I'm your host, Paul Swanson. Today, I welcome Patrick Boland, an author, teacher, coach, and consultant. In our conversation, we talk about his book, The Contemplative Leader, Uncover the Power of Presence and Connection. Patrick is whipsmart, a strategic thinker with a contemplative heart and presence. Patrick's atypical approach to leadership brings a new vitality to leadership development. Excited for you to get a taste of Patrick's work here. And as always, you can visit contemplify.com for the show notes on this episode and learn more about Patrick Boland at thecontemplativeleader.com. That's thecontemplativeleader.com. Now join me in raising a glass to my guest and friend today, Patrick Boland. Patrick, I'm so happy to have you here. One thing I always just like to begin with, just to kind of set the stage of your locale and where you are. Where are we finding you today, and what is the context of your setting?
Well, Paul, it's great to be with you. Truly delighted to be chatting with you today. Always love speaking with you. I am in Greystones in Wicklow in Ireland. So that's on the east coast of Ireland. It's like an hour south of Dublin, just on the coast. So it's a nice spot, kind of where the mountains and the sea come together. I am pretty close to the water itself. So on a really cold, stormy day like today, it's great to just get out just before Christmas and see the waves. And I'm getting too giddy, Paul. We're going to need to edit some of that. I'm going to need to reel it back in here.
I love it. I can feel myself in that same giddy space because there's nothing more joyful than talking to a friend about the things that matter. And sometimes that tips me over into just like pure fun, as you mentioned, after party energy of just like letting it all hang out. So I'm thrilled to be in conversation with you today. And for those that don't know you, they're in for a real treat because you are a truly deep contemplative who expresses it in a manifold of ways in your life. But I also don't want to put that word on you if you don't feel like it's fair. So I want to ask you, when you hear the word contemplative, how does that moniker relate to you and your work, if you think it does?
I love the question. I love the word. I love the idea of it. It means so many different things. For me, it means mystic. It means someone who is non-attached. It means being present to what is rather than an idea of our desire of what we'd like it to be. It means showing up and being here without the need to control the moment or to force the moment. So for me, I'm very happy to be referred to or as a contemplative. It's what I seek to be. It's what I would like to be. And then in my work and writing and different things that I do, it's certainly the highest form of how I want to be and how I want my work to engage with people in a contemplative way. So it's not a forceful way. It's a non-attached way.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember when the first time you heard that word or how that entered your lexicon or somebody that embodied it? How anything come to mind about who that was or what moment that was?
Yeah, I haven't thought of this moment for quite a while. It was, I don't know, about 16, 17 years ago. And I was on holiday, on vacation in the south of Spain. And I was sitting by a pool, and my friend who I was with handed me Richard Rohr's book, Everything Belongs. And I thought, oh, not one of these books again. And about 2 hours later, I said, I'll give it a go. And so I read the first 20 pages, 30 pages. I went, oh, I relate to this. This makes sense. That's the first time that I saw the word in that kind of context that I described, where it wasn't some kind of alternative way of saying I'm reflecting peacefully, but it was actually something of a lot more substance and presence. It was really embodied and integrated. And I remember it kind of jolted me, and I had a sense of deeper resonance and awareness. And this feels right. This feels true. You're talking about something that kind of the poets and the mystics and those moments of beauty and those unusual moments of challenge that they all kind of bring to my lived experience. So that was the first time.
Wow. And then as you were introduced to that through that book, Everything Belongs, how did that, what's the word I'm looking for? How did that invite you into different ways of practice or different ways of seeing the world? How do you recall, like, what was your kind of entry point into trying to deepen into this stance towards life?
Well, I remember it was a book that was speaking about so many elements of my life experience, where I'd come through phases of very dualistic, black and white ways of thinking about life, thinking about faith, spirituality, thinking about God. I was at a point where I just no longer had the tools or the frameworks to understand what was happening in life. Like, I'd had a lot of disappointments. I'd had a lot of plans not go well. I had a deep-seated sense of presence and connection with myself, with the world, with God. But I couldn't really describe it, or I couldn't really find too many other people in community where I could express that. I remember, first off, I was wrestling with not being in control. How can we live, and how can we, because I had been quite type A in my approach to life. It had been very much nurtured in my environment. And I tried a lot of different things in career-wise and in other parts of life. And I was just struggling to make sense of it all. Thinking I'd done good things and I'd done the right thing, quote unquote, the right thing. So the framing of contemplative really helped me to move beyond this idea of a script, of the narrative of life. What does life look like when it's successful? Who determines that? How do you know? Because in my mind, I was off script. I was making mistakes left, right, and center. I was watching my peers advance in their careers, settle down, get married, all the things that weren't happening for me at the time. I'd recently just found out that I was colorblind and couldn't become a pilot, which is what I'd been training to do, well, preparing to train to do. So yeah, that kind of helped me to make peace with not being in control and not having a plan and not trying to force the future and even not trying to force the moment, because I realized I was approaching every moment with an agenda. I was holding on tightly. I needed friends to be a certain way. I needed life to be a certain way, my career to be a certain way. And if it wasn't that way, then I was wrong or it was wrong. And I was looking for kind of like the silver bullet.
Yeah.
And then I remember reading that book encouraged me to get back to practices of meditation in a new way. So I'd been meditating as a young child. So from about the age of 8, I started trying it out by myself. It was quite unusual. I used to sit on the shed, on the roof of the shed in the back garden and try to meditate. And I really liked it. So like, I had no idea what I was doing, but it kind of made sense to me.
Yeah.
And then when I was 12 in school, we started being formally taught to meditate. So that's sometimes once a week or once a month in religion class, we'd be taken to a chapel and we'd be guided in some of the Ignatian spiritual exercises. And we'd be guided in how to meditate. And I absolutely loved it. Most of my classmates did not, but I thought it was fantastic. And I'd kind of stopped meditating at that point. So I kind of got back into it, and I didn't really realize just the other forms of meditation from within the Christian traditions, apart from the Ignatian ones that I'd been exposed to. And the way of being present to the moment and letting go and learning to acknowledge my ego, leave it on the chair, stand up and bow to it and acknowledge all the desires that it has, of all the things that it wants to be and the ways it wants to be perceived and loved, and all the success ticks that I wanted to get, all the check marks. So that was really freeing for me, helped me to begin to let go of things that were actually holding me back and preventing me from living like life in all its fullness, which paradoxically was a big hope and vision of mine. I thought if I fill my life with all the best stuff, all the good stuff, and have control of it and go in the right direction, that will give me a full life. And I was totally missing out. That fullness is found in this moment and our attitude and how we engage.
Wow. Thank you for that beautiful answer. I feel like you took a very simple answer and then poured so many nutrients into it. And I appreciate that and I can see so much of that in your book. And I can't wait to talk about your book. But something that you just said about you started meditating when you were 8. What was that first spark? Was it intuitive, or did you hear about it somewhere? How did that come to pass that you were taking those shed visits to meditate?
I honestly don't know. I know that when I was young, I had a deep sense of spirituality, and my mom and my nana would have prayed with me and would have taken me to mass regularly, and it kind of just resonated for me. It kind of made sense. And I think at some point in primary school, in some of our religion classes, there must have been something mentioned about meditation, or maybe there was something on TV. I really don't know, but it was very much in the Eastern tradition of meditation. So I was practicing, sitting with my legs crossed. I didn't know there was a name of lotus. I didn't know any of that stuff, but something about it just appealed to me, and I maybe seen a picture or a video of it, and I thought I'd like to try that out.
That's great. I think I just heard an interview with David White where he talks about the seductiveness of Zen, like the word even sounds sexy.
It does.
And then everything about it looks so cool. He's like, it's perennial cool until you realize that Zen teaches you that
exactly
you are not cool. Like everything is past. And I love that there is an attraction, I think, to that word, and just seeing those postures that intuitively makes sense. That it's fun to think of 8-year-old Patrick being drawn to it, and whatever was the original spark.
I do remember sitting on the shed roof, my eyes closed, and hearing 2 young guys from the other class in school walking down the back lane by my parents' house, shouting abuse at me, and opening my eyes. And they were shouting what a weirdo I was. And I remember just closing my eyes again and holding the posture. And then once they left, I sheepishly crawled down off the roof.
Wow. What a moment, though. That's pretty significant. And maybe I'm just projecting onto you, because there's this moment, I'm sure I've probably mentioned it here before, but when I was a kid about that age, one of my neighbors, she called me weird. And I went and told my mom, and my mom's like, why would you want to be normal? And it was like the biggest gift, because I've kind of carried that with me whenever there's this name calling of whatever you're doing is unordinary or weird, to why do you want to be normal is a great invitation, no question, to consider what is normal, what does it mean to participate in that, and is that something I want to be?
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. I had a similar but different thing where I definitely wasn't encouraged around the meditation, the spiritual stuff. So from my dad, he thought it was very weird, and he would make that very clear. But then at the same time, he'd say, "You're not normal because you're better than others." But that was a slightly different angle, which wasn't the most helpful, perhaps, in retrospect.
Right. No, it's interesting to hear the different angles of approach to something that has a somewhat similar through line. Patrick, as a way for folks listening to get to know you, I'm very curious about this answer because I have a few guesses, but if someone were going to teach a class on the formation of Patrick Boland, what would be the 3 mandatory readings or works or places that formed you that you would definitely want to be on that syllabus?
Wow. The obvious one that comes to mind, 2 come to mind. So, getting to know my mum, her way of being in the world, that would be a big piece because that's so foundational. My school, we call it secondary school, so it's kind of like a combination of high school and middle school. So my school in Dublin, which was called Gonzaga, which is a Jesuit school. It's more some of the individual teachers there more than the school in general, I'd say. Learning Italian, going to Italy, living and working there. Yeah.
How old were you when you were learning Italian and living in Italy?
I started from scratch in college. So I started the day I turned 18, first day I went to college.
Wow.
Yeah, I like languages. So I thought I would do a new one. And I'd never even been to Italy. I just like the idea of it. And over here, you have to choose your major before you even enter college. So it was just a hit and hope. It was a double major. So Italian was one of them. So I was committed from day one. I had 4 years of that ahead of me. And it was a joy. Yeah.
All in.
Yeah.
And it worked
so
out.
Beautiful.
How many languages do you speak?
Realistically now, after English, Italian is definitely my next language. And I can get by pretty well. And I could probably pick it up easily in a few months living there again. And then Irish is probably my next best language. I've working with clients in Ireland recently, and it's an all Irish speaking company. So writing letters and emails in Irish and talking to them in Irish, that's kind of fun. But my Irish is not what it was 25 years ago when it peaked. And then I can get by in French and understand a bit of German. And because in school we had to do French or we had to do Latin. And I chose German instead of Greek, which I regretted a lot afterwards. If I'd known, I'd have become interested in ancient Greek texts. I had no idea at the time how helpful it would have been.
Right.
So yeah, realistically, like Italian is pretty passable, and Irish is okay, and French is okay as well. Probably French and Irish are probably similar.
Every question I ask just shows bits and pieces of what a Renaissance man you are, and I love that because I don't feel like you ever lead with that. It's like this continual unpeeling of the gifts, talents, presences, and perspectives of Patrick Boland. So thank you for humoring me and me poking the language question.
No, you're not at all. I don't see myself as that Renaissance man. I just still remember my teachers all telling me I wasn't good enough in any of those languages. So it doesn't cross my mind. I just know. I can just hear that and go, well, I'm doing my best. So that's about it.
Yeah. I want to ask a question about Italian. Is there any text or poet that like you wish everyone could read in Italian, or anything about the Italian language? Maybe it's the way to argue. Maybe it's the way to tell a joke. What do you think is best exemplified through the Italian language?
Oof. So many thoughts come to mind. They're few things. They're very good and very funny at cursing. Some of the curses, the literal meaning is hilarious. And I won't repeat them here on your podcast, but I've taught some friends over the years how to get by in a pub in Italy and guaranteed to get some good laughs. I love things like when I was doing my exams in like economics and commerce, we had to do everything publicly and orally. So you walk into a room, there's 80 students there, and you're going to be sitting there for 3 days, and you don't know at which moment they're going to call your name, and you're just listening. And there's up to 5 people interviewing you. And if you get by the first few interviews, then you get to like be interviewed by the professor. This was like at 20 years of age. And they can ask you any detailed question on any of the 800-page textbook that was part of your course over the last 12 weeks. people come in off the street, old ladies are standing in the corner, smoking a cigarette, listening. I remember sitting there and on day 3, eventually being called up and then, having my first exam in my broken best efforts of Italian. And then later asking somebody, why do we do it this way? And they said, well, when universities were first being founded in Bologna and in Paris, the lecturer would walk around the courtyard and there'd be maybe 8 or 10 or 12 people following him around. And then he'd stop every now and then, turn around and ask clarifying questions of the students and just check, do they follow along? And if they did, he'd continue walking. If they didn't, he'd kind of either grill them or explain more and then turn and walk again. So they've kept up this, centuries old tradition of public oral exams where everybody's listening to each other's answers as they go. So that for me kind of typifies some of the beauty of Italian culture and the language. Like even it took them 500 years to decide on Italian being the national language. Like it's just the dialect of Tuscany. And they had questions for literally 500 years and arguments. And so it was all because of Dante and Petrarch and Boccaccio, because of their writings being so famous and the first writings in the local language rather than Latin. That gave them a head start. And it was only in the 1960s when they had television around that Italians started really speaking Italian all throughout the whole place. So I love that I got friends who they speak better English than Italian because they didn't speak it growing up at home.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible. I didn't realize the history of their language and how it is somewhat new as far as it being universal in Italy.
Yeah. About 150 years ago, they kind of went, that's the one. We'll choose that one.
That's wild.
Yeah, so I love the history. I love the history and the culture of it all. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's, again, one of the fun things about being in conversation with you is like you scratch one thing and it breaks into great stories and history. And one reason why I'm very excited to talk about your book, The Contemplative Leader, Uncover the Power of Presence and Connection. And this book is labeled a business book, but like many good books that articulate meaning and impact through a reflective and strategic philosophical lens or framework, business only covers a part of it because there's so much more to it. I think it touches so many different aspects of the human experience and what it means to be a leader. So I want to ask you, beyond the business section of the bookstore, what other sections of the bookstore would you hope that this book would be found and why?
It's funny. I was surprised when it said business because in my mind it's leadership. So it's all forms of influence. For me, honestly, Paul, it's a mixture of spirituality, fundamentally, philosophy, definitely psychology, elements of sociology, and it obviously has natural implications in organizations, but also in communities and not-for-profit organizations and in politics. It's fundamentally about being human and understanding ourselves and understanding that when we approach the moment in a contemplative way, in a non-attached way, that can have profound impact not only on us, on how we see and how we experience the moment and the future and our strategies and our plans. That non-dualistic both-and approach. But it can also have a profound effect on others, those with whom we relate, those with whom we work in teams or as part of groups, and on culture and entire organizations. So in many ways, it's kind of a book that encapsulates elements of, let's say, an 8-year period of my life, of my professional life, especially, bringing together all the different ways of looking. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live a good life? That Aristotelian question. Mm-hmm. What is it? And also how to make sense of that in a realistic way, in a kind of a practical way. My dream, Paul, was originally to be a writer of wonderful novels. and I wrote a couple, and I had great feedback from a few agents, all encouraging me strongly to go and write nonfiction. So they're like, we like your TED Talk. We like the way you present this and that. You're good at talking about messages. And for me, like, the beauty of a novel is like you get to, in a holistic, integrated, beautiful way, help people to learn about life and themselves, to experience beauty in ways that are profoundly transformational. So this is the next best thing that I can do. It's just much more, I wouldn't say logical, I was about to say logical, but much more personal in ways that can be followed along. And there's, like, contemplative exercises, there's reflections, things to do. But there's also some, embodied exercises, some psychodynamic exercises and stuff to try with your spouse, partner, friends, as well as people we work with. So this is the second best thing after my failed novels.
Well, I think you have a real craft for taking the elements of what you're trying to communicate and organizing them in a way for clear communication to be accessed and built upon. So as you move through this book, it continues to, like, build upon the previous chapters, which you would think this would be intuitive for most people. I don't think it is in most books, that they don't build in this way, where it feels like it's a generous heaping on of portions that you can handle. And so as it builds, the plate gets fuller and fuller, but you can handle it because of what's been prepared for on that way.
I love that observation, because that was my hope, and I think you're the first and only person thus far who's seen that was the intention, to do that, so that you're building and integrating as you go. So that's brilliant.
It was naturally felt as a reader, I thought. And I think it speaks to the wholeness of what you're trying to communicate too. And that's something I want to ask you about. Like, what is it about leadership that requires a pursuit of wholeness, or a sense of wholeness, or an invitation towards wholeness for someone to be fully in their potential as a leader?
There's that age-old adage of those who want to lead kind of got to just be careful. Why do they want to lead? Good rule of thumb is the ones who see leadership opportunities, possibilities, ways of doing things well, ways of integrating systems, bringing people together, ways of connecting, but don't really want to be a leader. But they're the ones to invest in. They're the ones to support. And I ended up, the last 11 years, being a coach and a leadership consultant, as well as doing psychotherapy and doing bits of writing. And I've ended up in ways that I couldn't have anticipated or expected, working with leaders, like very senior leaders in some global organizations. And sometimes I've been amazed and honored to be with the caliber of people, just so inspired to go, I really want to support you and what you're doing and the initiatives that you have and your vision, huge, let's get clean water for 100 million people in a country in Asia. I'm like, wow. And here's the vision and here's the approach, and hearing these leaders' stories and why they want to do it and where it's coming from. That's been inspiring. And I've equally been not inspired, let's say, when I've seen some leaders use their position and use their influence to gather resources, to put others down, to be manipulative, coercive, destructive in interpersonal relationships and team relationships, to use their corporations, their companies as personal fiefdoms, whereby they can gather as many resources as possible and as much power as possible and wield it and use it in ways that are quite destructive to the collective. It's heartbreaking to see. And it's something that inspires me both scenarios inspire me. I'm painting opposite ends of the spectrum because it's not usually that polarized. But both inspire me to want to support leaders to do their work, to do their inner work, to know who they are and what they're about, and to stop following some of maybe the more adolescent narratives that they've taken on and brought into corporate life, political life, religious life, where they're trying to build their own kingdom and they're trying to expand it in ways that can be quite detrimental to others and not very considerate. And for some, they actively and really want to do good, and they really want to bring about great healing and great contribution, but they don't realize like there's a lot of shadow work that's not done. And they don't realize that as long as they're leading from a place of fear, or they're leading because they want to reactively right wrongs that were done to them, and then essentially be an activist, that there's an energy about that there's an attachment, that there's a control element about that too, that can be very destructive for relationships. So in summary, really, Paul, my answer is to help leaders to take responsibility for who they are, because it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks and that our actions come. So the book, and the first 2/3 of the book in particular, I call it the inner journey of contemplative leadership. So it's progressively moving from cognitive understandings of narratives to looking at our nervous system and our body, to looking at how we've framed challenge, failure, rejection, pain in the past, and getting into values. How do we approach change? And then psychodynamic things around personas and identities. And when I'm leading something, which is the dominant identity or persona that's coming out? And when I'm at home, which is the dominant identity or persona? Are these helpful? Is this bringing me to where I want to go? And then ultimately leading with meaning, accepting ourselves and moving from the false self into the true self. Not that we're ever going to fully lead from there the whole time. That's not realistic, I don't think. We'll always be leading through elements of the false self. But even shining a light on it and doing some of our shadow work and seeking to integrate elements of the false self that we're aware of, that can be appropriate and necessary in daily life, in the cut and thrust of business and leading and politics and leading any organization, but also deep resonance and deep meaning. So trying to find non-dualistic ways of both the people and the financials, both the outcomes and the processes that get us there. So that integrative piece, that's the real hope, and why I wrote the book, and why that's the kind of work that I do when I work with individuals and with organizations to find ways to integrate so that we can use our role and use our organizations as vehicles for contribution and not just for taking. There's a real satisfaction that comes from that, and it can be something deeply spiritual as well.
That's beautiful. It's so notable that, as you said, 2/3 of the book is like the inner journey. It is the reflection, is the exercises on identities, values. Who am I? Basically questions of philosophical nature. And even the language you just used as you were sharing that was from a place of overflow of the heart, which is a beautiful thing to hear. And after reading the book, that can sound flowery, but the work of it is like the fierce, bloody, beating heart. It's very concrete. And there's the significance of contemplation within this. How is contemplation, from your standpoint, a key ingredient for one's own grounded fullness as a leader, as you just shared about the contributing beautifully to the world, but also showing up in a way that is healthy for yourself and others? How is contemplation a key ingredient for living into that fullness as a leader?
I remember trying to explain my answer to this to a friend a couple of years ago when I was finishing off writing the book, and he couldn't follow my answer at all. And then he reframed it this way, and he said, so is contemplation kind of like non-attachment? I said, yeah, we're going to go with that. That's going to be the oversimplistic yet helpful kernel of truth that I'm going to use. So being non-attached as a leader means that we're not trying to force things. We're not trying to take control. And so much, particularly of corporate life, but also political life. And I've worked with many NGOs. I've worked with several religious institutions in the past. There's different flavors within the traditional cultures of each of those sectors of what control looks like. But there's still the same perfume about being around people who are trying to be in control. Some want to look good. Some want to be right. Some want to insist on having their way. And when we are pursuing that more than what is emerging in the moment, we miss opportunities all the time. Not only do we miss opportunities, we miss other people. We miss relationships. And fundamentally, that can only happen if we're really missing ourselves, if we're really not connecting in with ourselves, because we are living from a narrative, some kind of, and it's usually a subconsciously held narrative of, this is what a leader does. I used to be in the team, but now I have to behave this way. I have to do certain things. So I'm really thinking of how can we become aware of those things and then become non-attached. A lot of the time I find lots of companies talk about the bottom line and they talk about finances and the money, and like, well, the money is the driving force behind things. And certain cultures, certain countries around the world that lean more heavily towards that than to others. And this is saying, well, obviously, like, the finances are important, but it's not just the finances. It's a whole vision of work and of life and of your firm, your organization, your corporation. And saying, essentially what it is it's one way to bring people together, to work together, to find ways to compromise, to negotiate, to collaborate, and to choose to be together rather than to be themselves, so that we can do great work. That is essential part of being human. We can express ourselves, we can contribute, we can feel the satisfaction that comes from this. We can grow, we can develop others. And we can do it in ways that are mutually beneficial, that are beneficial for our local community as well as our society, and that fundamentally espouse the worldview we have. I've met people who have very deep faith, for example, very generous people, and they'll financially contribute to different causes, and they'll go to their different church services on a Sunday. And then during the week, they can be quite black and white and quite cutthroat and say, well, this is just business. This is just this thing. I've always found that a strange way of doing things. It's almost like relegating certain values and saying, well, I'm segmenting it to this part of my life. And in this part of my life, these are the rules of the game. And so this is what has to happen in order to move on. And I don't accept that. And the best leaders I've worked with and the most inspiring organizations I've worked with, they don't see it as that black and white, as that dualistic. They see it as more non-dualistic. They're very pragmatic and understand the details of what we have to do to stay in business and what we have to do to develop and to grow. But it's about much more than just the bottom line. I mean, I interview quite a few people in the book, as you'll remember, Paul. So people from Richard Rohr to start talking about what is contemplation. Then people who, like the former CEO of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, talking about his own personal values and the values of hard work that he had and fairness and equity from growing up, and just working on the factory floor with his father growing up, and how he realizes that some of those values, they really massively have been the engine behind his motivation that led him to certain sectors and to working in certain ways with certain people and seeking certain experiences with people and from people and building certain types of businesses so that equity and fairness are naturally espoused in daily life. It's not just at the weekend. So I suppose I was trying to get different interviews with different business leaders and non-business leaders to talk about their relationship of what work looks like and how they integrate who they are. And they're not trying to just segment private life from personal life. it's one or the other. That whole dualistic vision, I think we've talked before, it comes about from this understanding of this split, Cartesian dualism. We'll talk about it. Now I think, therefore I am. So we started to go, well, certain things are better than others. But it's not just that. In spirituality, we have a similar split from Thomas Aquinas 1,000 years ago, going back to the Greek philosophers who were saying, to be a philosopher and to be upper class and to own land and to spend your time talking about ideas, that is the best way of being. And then you have your servants and the middle classes and the people who work. And again, this idea of the split, what's better, what's worse, and how that manifested itself, say, in traditions in the Catholic Church of, are you the clergy? Are you the top tier? Are you not the clergy? Then you're not the top tier. Then there's certain expectations of power and things. And nowadays in our society, that whole narrative, we don't think about it in those ways. We say, look, it doesn't really matter. You choose what you want. But I often think we have a similar dualistic take when it comes to work and leadership and business, that, well, this is the best way to do it here, and that's the best way to do it there. And we have to split and segment. And that doesn't make sense to me, to my life experience, to integrating what does it mean to live a full life. It doesn't make sense to my kids.
Yeah.
I've done some work with the Lego group for a number of years, and they don't care that I'm chatting to these guys about strategy or I'm chatting to them about different things. They just say, when you talk to the Lego people, tell them they should build this, and they tell me this thing, and then I just go tell them. I've told some very senior people feedback from my 4-year-old, and they love it because the culture and the values there are like, yeah, like obviously let's listen to all of these things. And it's in no way taking away from the fact that they're seeking to last into the future and do an excellent job for all their shareholders, etc. But they're also trying to pay attention and listen as best they can. So I think the whole book is really about trying to integrate all the different parts of our lives so that it's possible to be contemplative in the ways we lead and in where we want to go with other people. Because I think that's incredibly beautiful.
Mm-hmm. That's so well said. That's so well said. And the wholeness that you're pointing to, the bringing together of a communitarian kind of landscape, like within ourselves, and then also for how we're relating to others, and not try to fracture our lives. Have you seen the TV show Severance? Have you heard of this show?
No.
I mean, it's basically, there's a lot to it, but one of the main factors is there's this company that has found this operation where they can sever part of your brain so that when you go to work, you have your work life. And then when you leave work, you don't remember anything that happened at work. So you have your work life and your home life, and you have no idea about what happens in either world. And I think it's such a poignant show and critique of particularly American culture.
Mm-hmm.
But that ability to know that's how many folks are trying to live, that there's no sense of overarching values that are guiding one's life, but like in the workspace, I can do this, in home life, I can do this. And it creates a real bifurcation, I think, in our identities and how we show up. And then I think the different ways, the different spaces that we participate in, whether it's in politics or online groups or in community organizations. All my favorite people are those who, like, I see them in different contexts, and they have different leading personas in each, but they're basically bringing the same sense of wholeness to each of those conversations. And I think you get to this throughout the book, and you drop these little nuggets along the way that just keep like reinforcing that this is, the goal is not perfection. The goal is presence and attention, so you can show up with all that you have from a conscious space, not just leaving. So much of life is unconscious patterns that we can fall into, but how do we make some of that conscious, and how we seek to lead and serve and participate in public and private life. And I think you do that in spades in this book.
Oh, thanks, Paul.
It's a real win, I think, for readers. And you highlight some different leaders in this book, and it's really fun to hear fun might be the wrong word, but like some of the challenges and failures, because you talk about the mindsets that help one learn from that rather than be stuck from those stuck points. And you talk about you can only lead others as far as we have first gone ourselves. Who has modeled that for you in their work and life? Is there, when you look at those who you feel like they've helped you see this holistic picture of somebody who is seeking to live as a contemplative leader from the way that you've been defining it, who have been those kind of lighthouses for you?
I love the question. You're getting me thinking of very diverse people. Let me first say that the thing that they all have in common is, rather than be motivated by fear, they have compassion on their fears. And as a result of that, they're on a lifelong journey of being themselves, being comfortable in their own skin. And then they go where that leads them. So they're not trying to get to a position. They're not trying to become a CEO, a head teacher, famous international, whatever. That's not as important at all as doing what is theirs to do, which fundamentally is being who they are.
Mm. And
that's the big piece. So, yeah, I've got some diverse people I could tell you about. My old chaplain from school, I met him when I was 17, and he was in his late 70s, and he just come back. He was a Jesuit priest, and he just come back from 40 years abroad doing work in different parts of Asia. It's a small little man, big smile on his face, and really kind, and just the most incredible presence. And then you'd hear him stand up to talk, you'd hear him give a sermon, and just this deep presence and this fire, but like the right kind of fire.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he spoke at our graduation from high school. I remember the parents mainly being shocked at his message, because he was just like, you know, there's a lot of privilege here. I look around and I see a lot of money here, and I'm wondering, what are we doing with our privilege? What are we doing with our money? Are we working for justice? How are we contributing to the world tangibly? As a graduate here, and as parents of graduates here, it's not about how much money you make or what role you get. It's about who you are, how closely you stick to being you, and how you contribute back. I was just there beaming away thinking, that's it. You're on it. I don't know how to do that. I like it.
Wow.
And like true shock and horror. He gave some feedback to some of the senior leaders in that place. They were truly shocked and horrified. So I've got people like him who virtually nobody in the world has heard of. And when I was younger, Paul, I remember thinking, like, in order to be some kind of a hero, because there's some element of that within Western culture, well, in all culture in various ways, but you know, within the adolescent mind, the idea of like, I will be successful, I will be acceptable, I will be lovable if and when I do these things, or I am these things for other people, or I'm famous, or I'm whatever it is. And I remember every now and then I'd meet somebody who or I'd encounter somebody who wasn't famous, who wasn't globally known, who wasn't rich, and they had presence. And they were comfortable being themselves, and people loved them, and they wanted to be friends with them. And I remember thinking, what is that essence that these people have? Like, what is it? So I've met some leaders with that. I've met some leaders that I've worked with. Again, not the most famous leaders in the world, but people who have worked through their fears and have learned to be assertive, who have learned to say no to bullies, who have learned to trust their instinct, who have learned to persevere against challenging odds for the collective good, not just for their own egoistic sense of belonging. I've worked with and met some incredible parents who, I just couldn't imagine being anything like them. The way that they look after their kids with profound needs and like do a PhD at the same time and looking after other kids and multiple trips to hospitals with ambulances all the time. So yeah, that's the beginnings of my answer. Every now and then I've met like an incredible leader as well, like who's doing sterling stuff. And honestly, they've usually come from a place, not always, but usually, where they've suffered, where they've lost out, or life's been tough, and where they learned to take responsibility for themselves. They learned not to play the victim, and they learned deeper grounding ways of having exercises that remind them of who they are, and having, in many cases, a deep faith or spirituality or practice that reminds them of ultimate essence, whatever that is for them.
That's one thing I so appreciate about you is I think there's a naturalness to this, but also the cultivation of attention and noticing what makes somebody exude this presence. And you're able to do it in these different sectors and notice it and see the pieces behind that. And not only through relationship, you almost like see in the person the value that they're carrying, the principle that they're carrying, that you can highlight, help them notice, and then share it with others as well. And again, you do that in spades in this book. And I want to talk about, you mention Viktor Frankl in your book, and we were just talking about struggle and how that can sometimes be a catalyst for leaders if they're able to face that and face it with compassion. And in my mind, you kind of upend the whole follow your passion motif by saying follow your passion, but because you examine the roots of passion as a form of suffering that you're willing to endure. That's a different take when I often hear about passions, like, what gets you excited about life? And then you list all the things that you have just mentioned around, like whether it's someone being rich, famous, or having prestige in the world. But passion as a form of suffering that must be endured, like it's purposeful. There's an endurance in that and a fidelity to it. And I think about, this is a quick sidebar, but the pedagogist Paulo Freire, when he was asked, maybe you know this story, on his deathbed about what was most important in your life, and he said the daily struggle to be congruent. And I find that like so rich and edifying. It's the sense of, and it connects to like that is passion. How do you live out this sense of wholeness in the daily struggle of life? So I want to ask this question back to you that you beautifully put in your book of, so you're a leader, and with this definition of passion, what are you willing to suffer for?
Well, first to say that Paulo Freire quote really, really touched me there. He's definitely a hero of mine and someone I studied. And during my years as an educator, I used to try his approaches and throw out the curriculum and get the kids to write the curriculum and do all the things that are seen as crazy and wild. There was space for it where I was teaching, which was great. And I really love that idea of congruence. That very much resonates. So is your question for me seeing it in leaders or for me?
I think seeing it in yourself, because you do a beautiful job, I think, of pointing out that passion is just not what excites you, but what you're willing to endure, be it suffering, be it success even, I think. Like you're enduring from a different posture than, I would say, a cultural sense of success, because there's purpose behind it. So I'm just thinking about you and the entirety of your life. Like, what suffering are you willing to endure to be a passionate leader in this way? Or are enduring? I don't want to assume anything.
Yeah. Well, it feels like it does feel like.
I mean, you're enduring this question for one. So
no, I'm absolutely loving the question. I'm absolutely loving it. at a surface level, Passio, I do suffer from my love of etymology, and it causes me great pain when I'm constantly seeing roots of words and ideas that are misappropriated consistently. And someone goes, yeah, passion, get excited. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's got nothing to do with getting excited. Get ready to suffer. Let's go. It's probably a similar answer to Paulo Freire. There's a reason that he is in the hall of heroes of mine. Big challenge for me has always been, continues to be, to accept who I am and to be that. Different seasons in life afford us different opportunities to inhabit different facets of ourselves. I have never really fitted the mold. Usually it looked like I fitted the mold on the outside, so people assume that I did. I can put on a suit and talk to a boardroom, no problem. And it's much deeper than when you have imposter syndrome. It's more like the things that feel true and real for me, I'm not so sure how true and real they feel for too many others. In my lived experience, not too many. Sometimes. And so, yeah, I've spent a lot of time trying to, firstly, be someone who I wasn't. That was the adolescent project. I went on beyond adolescence in ways. It's painful, difficult. And then realizing I can't be anything else than that. Having multiple perspectives. I love history, I love context, I love understanding, roots of things. That's something that when you bring it into a very practical world, people usually just want a quick answer. Give me 3 bullet point answer and just tell me how to make 10% more this year or whatever it is. That's an active challenge sometimes in my professional work. Honestly, I struggled to even work in the corporate world at all. There was a lot of forces in my life saying that's the way to go and where you go, and obviously that's what you do. So I've often felt like a fish out of water in that world. And then at the same time, when I've met incredible people, incredible leaders, incredible organizations who have a desire to be conscious and aware and connected, I go, okay, now I'm reminded why I do what I do, because a lot of the time on a daily basis, I look at LinkedIn on a daily basis and it breaks my heart. I'm going, surely not this many people are overjoyed, delighted with the amazing opportunity that they had yesterday. It doesn't sound that amazing, just sounds like a day at work. But really, is that the level of professional engagement and human engagement that we have? And, it's playing the game. Obviously, I get it. I struggle with playing that game. I struggle with doing that. I'm rambling here. I'm not sure if I'm even answering your question.
You are. I think you're pointing to the ineffable vulnerability, I think, of trying to be congruent in the daily struggle. And what I heard you saying was like, there's pockets where you like, yes, this is worth enduring. I'm enduring it for this reason, for this moment of work. I'm seeing this, but there's still a lot of swamps to walk through and dealing with different swamp monsters. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that I found your book so concretely helpful and inspiring, was just the relatableness of how do I bring my own vulnerability to who I want to be in my life and my work. Like, this is a great book, I think, for anyone to approach when they're I'm in midlife, so it's easy for me to say this, but like in the questions of midlife, of who am I and who do I want to be as a person, as a leader. And I love that you end the book in that kind of similar tone with, like, you go back to the basics of the questions of, you go through all these different exercises and frameworks. We didn't even get to the 3 domes of meaning or spiral dynamics, but like they're all in there. And then we get to the end, and it's the question of why do I lead? And therefore, what am I trying to build as a result? And then you had a few more nuanced questions there, but you land us back at the beginning. And I love that cyclical nature that you invite us as readers into. How important is that for you writing this book to not provide an endpoint answer, but to show that this is an ongoing cycle, that you get to participate in this daily struggle to be congruent in life?
I so appreciate that you saw that, Paul. Thank you. It's deeply important to go in that cyclical way. I think it's the way life is. It's cyclical, it's seasonal. We go back to the start and we're there for the very first time. It's like any mystical idea of the moment or any sacred text. It's the idea that we engage with it and it meets us where we're at. And then we engage with it again and we see something else because now we're more open and more ready to see it again. And then we engage with this thing again and you can say, well, it's just the same thing, but there's multiple levels of it. Like literally it's working on a quantum level. It's like the original Copenhagen principles. You shoot an electron gun, you create the conditions to see an electron and that's all you see. Then you put 2 slits in your piece of cardboard and the particle turns into a wave and then reforms the particle. You've created the conditions to see it differently. And I think that's the nature of mysticism, that wherever we are, there we are, to use that quote, which I think is a fantastic quote. But we just keep on going again. We just keep on cyclically going again and engaging in life and engaging in the hero's journey multiple times. Here we are, we're invited into another adventure, which involves a descent, which involves a letting go, which involves engaging with our passions in the original sense of it. And then as something dies, which allows space for something else to be born. And then we come back with something more to offer, to give. And then here we go again. I think it follows life stage development theories. You know, the things that we want when we're children are different to what we want as adolescents, are hopefully different to what we want into early adulthood and into midlife. And if they're not different, if we still want the same things we wanted when we were 16 years of age, it might be worth asking the question why. What has happened or not happened there, or what narratives are we still building in? So it's the cyclical nature of, let's just revisit who we are again and again, trusting that there's just deeper and deeper layers of it, and that rather than trying to find the right answer, we can just find, well, what's resonating in this moment, and trust the benign nature of that. And therefore, with what we know and who we are now, what is it we want to do with that? You know, because the whole point of that question, those questions at the end that you quoted, Paul, is to kind of go, are we leading something to try and build something, to build a little kingdom, to feel powerful, to feel worthwhile, to feel lovable? Because that's the nature of conditional love. And then we're going to build systems and organizations and corporations where we're going to insist on control. I'm not sure the world needs any more leaders. We're going to try and actively control things and compete for control and engage in zero-sum games. But if we're doing our work consistently and becoming more and more contemplative in our lived experience, maybe we can contribute in that in vehicles and in interpersonal relationships in ways that allow for expansiveness, that allow for a possibility, that allow for cultures that are holistic, that can value people as well as everything else. So it's really looking to ask the question that we can return to over and over again. So hopefully that our life experience deepens and grows and matures. And part of that is a lot of passia, a lot of suffering.
Patrick, this is an amazing note to end on. And I feel like I say this every time that we get a chance to connect or hang out. I just makes me want to hang out more. Like I just want always more time with you. I find you so engaging and inspiring and interesting as a human who's just offers themselves through the fullness of your vulnerability and always willing to risk in conversation. So I can't thank you enough. And before we go, there's always one question I have to ask the guests before we leave is, if you were going to pair our conversation with a drink, anything from water to whiskey, what would be your drink of choice and why?
Oh, I love that question. And it goes without saying that I always love our conversations, and I'm very, very grateful to be here with you. So I've really enjoyed it. Can't wait to hang out another time. I think the most appropriate drink would be a collection of whiskies. Because I think there's elements of our conversation where we need a good old smoky, peaty whiskey. I'd even go Western Isles. I'd go Scotland. So we could even use that US term of Scotch if you want. So let's go Islay, let's go Jura, let's go Lagavulin, something like that. Give it a good 15 years, and that'll remind us of the passio parts of the conversation. And that there's a sweet note at the end, and then it kind of burns your throat at the same time. And you're not really sure how it hit you, but you're glad you had it. And then I'd move into a nice Irish single pot still. So something like a Middleton Extra Rare or a Paris 12 or a Redbreast 21 or something, to think about celebrating the moment with the sweetness. Thank God we've come through the smoky whiskey, and let's enjoy this one.
I love the specificity, and I cannot wait to our next chance to clink a glass and sip on something.
I will bring some over.
This has been a joy. Thank you, Patrick. Such a joy.
Thanks so much, Paul.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Contemplify. May it stir conversation with kindred spirits and strangers alike, and provide a nourishing morsel of thought for your week. Slip over to contemplify.com to find the show notes for this episode. While you're there, sign up for the monthly Contemplify non-required reading list and the weekly contemplative practice, Lo-Fi and Hushed. If you're enjoying Contemplify, rate and review it on your podcast player. The president of the internet slipped me a note just the other day on a napkin that said, "This will help spread the contemplative cheer." The theme song of Contemplify is called Langside by Charles Enns and Darren Hovius. Fellas, grateful as always. And I'm looking forward to bringing you more musings and conversations with contemplatives in the world here in the near future. Until then, be well.